All right, thank you for being here. We have David Broun who's going to talk to us now. I'm just wondering, do you want to move over here? Just wander into the centre, because then it's straight down here, down the chute. David is coordinator of Science Pathways for Indigenous Communities program at CSIRO. He's an educator engaged in the development and delivery of a two-way science learning program at the intersection of Indigenous knowledge and Western science with remote schools and communities in Western Australia. Cameron Hume is with us as well. The two of them are going to talk to us for the next 45 minutes. Please make them welcome.
Thank you very much. A hard act to follow, that one. That was great, wasn't it? Really enjoyed that. I love the two cans in the water to illustrate. Yes, so my name's David Broun. This is Cameron Hume. We've been lucky enough to work over the last few years for the CSIRO on a project called Science Pathways for Indigenous Communities. That's one element of a broader Indigenous STEM education program, which is delivered by the CSIRO and funded by the BHP Foundation. We've been doing that for the last few years in what really is effectively a kind of pilot project, and we're at a stage now where we've developed some education resources. There's some copies down here. Feel free to have a flick through. They're hot off the press, literally as of yesterday. Feel free to have a flick through if you want while we're talking. And an adult learning program. And a way of working with schools and communities to develop what we call a two-way science education model. We've been working in these communities here. At the moment, we've just expanded the project. We've got an extra year's funding to include 22 schools, remote community schools in Western Australia. And you can see there it's a huge area. They're all arid zone communities. They're all desert communities. They're in mining and pastoral areas, and they're also in areas that are managed by Aboriginal people, Indigenous protected areas and ranger programs that look after a lot of that country as well. But a massive region. And the schools themselves range in size from around 100 students, down to sort of 15 or 20 students, depending on where they are. For the most part, the students are Aboriginal, and in many cases, English is their second language. And what we'll do today is I'll talk through a little bit about our model now and sort of the way we work, and then we'll just go through some examples of what we've been doing, which will help to illustrate and tell the story of the project. So two-way science is a model that we've come up with, and there's and really that's about the connection of Indigenous ecological knowledge with Western science, and it's a culturally responsive learning program. You can see we've got these ingredients, if you like, in this diagram here, which show really what the elements are. So those two elements of Indigenous ecological knowledge, so the knowledge of Aboriginal people in communities, of local Aboriginal people, alongside Western science and the science curriculum, and really the conditions for that and the place where the real powerful work happens is learning on country, and that's where students learn from elders, and students also share their knowledge with teachers. It's also where we complement that with Western science education activities. I guess this is a program that has community engagement at its core, and it meets the requirements of the Aboriginal Cultural Standards framework that schools in WA are using. But it's also a core curriculum program. So Aboriginal knowledge meets science education outcomes in many ways, and you'll see that as we go through some of these examples. But it's a great model in small remote community schools because everyone's involved. The community, the students, the teachers, and everyone is a learner in that model as well. This is what we call a two-way science teaching and learning cycle. And this structure, I guess, is you'll see that repeated in the examples that we talk about today and in our education resources. It's really just a framework for how we work. You can see there that it starts with the knowledge of Aboriginal people in the local community. And that could be elders, rangers and students. We ask that question of people in the community, and schools ask this question of people in the community: what do you want the kids, what do you want to teach the kids about culture and country? And that's where we start. We don't start with the curriculum. Then we work together with teachers and schools and the community to connect that into a learning program. And that's what these resources help us do. The possibilities of this kind of work are limitless. These are some examples of how that can work. It's a really exciting space in which to work. And then we've done that planning. There's always an element of learning beforehand in the class, and that could involve either working with elders or with the teacher teaching science concepts and language. The kids go out on country and engage in those cultural knowledge transfer activities alongside science activities, and then they follow that up back in the classroom and share the results of their learning with the community. I guess the main point we're making with this is that it's not just about going out on country. That has lots of value in itself, but we use that engagement and that knowledge and the value that the kids feel about their own knowledge to spread out through the curriculum. Okay, here's some nice pictures, and I'll tell you a story. I guess this is an example of a project we worked on in Wiluna with some elders in the school and the community. It's that word there you can see, Nganamara, is the Mardu word for mallee fowl. Wiluna is for those of you who don't know, it's in the centre of Western Australia, a remote Aboriginal community school, small community. There's a ranger program there, and we've had some really great results, and the school's been recognised for that in several awards in recent years. So there's Lauren. She teaches year 2, 3, 4 at Wiluna Remote Community School, and she's talking to Anthea, who's a Mardu teacher in the class. So Lauren and Anthea were talking about what was happening on country at that time in Yalta Puru, which is the cold time. Anthea told Lauren that her mother, Elder Rita Cutter, wanted to show the students a Nganamara malleefowl nest that had been found when people were out looking for emu eggs. And so they met in the staff room with Rita, and they talked about what was going to happen. So Rita told Lauren that Nganamara are rare. She wanted to show the students where they live, how they build their mound nests, and how to tell the difference between a Nganamara track, a garlia, which is an emu track, and a barada, which is the bush turkey track. And so they planned a trip out on country together. Lauren did some research and looked at these education resources and connected that to a program based around habitat. And there's some links, some curriculum links that she identified in that process. She started off in the classroom, following that teaching learning cycle again, asking the students about what they knew about Nganamara. And they in many cases, students will know a lot, but they didn't know much about the malleefowl because they're endangered. They hadn't been seen around, and so it was quite special that they'd been found in this place near Wiluna. And they talked about its nest, how big is its nest going to be, and did some prediction work around that. And they'd already done lots of work about asking questions. Kids coming from that sort of English as a second language background. So there's some explicit skills that need teaching as part of that. And they wrote questions and asked predictions. They watched a video about the malleefowl, a 1960s CSIRO video. It's great. It's a good watch. It's still relevant now. And then they went out about 60 k's from Maluna in some four-wheel drives in the school bus to visit the site of the nest. When they arrived, Rita was in charge. She was the one that led the learning. She showed the kids some tracks. This was on the road, and you can see there's the malleefowl, the Nunamara track, and also some tracks of cats. And she was worried about that because cats are a threat to malleefowl chicks, and she talked about that with the kids. As they walked closer to the nest, she found some bush turkey tracks, and you can see there's a comparison between the two tracks, and that was a really important bit of knowledge that she wanted the kids to learn. The turkey's track hasn't got that little back toe on it. And as they went toward the nest, they found evidence of the malleefowl that had been scraping up leaf litter to use in its mound nest. And she would show them that and tell them, where the plants were that it came from and how it scraped it up, that raking that it does. And when they found the nest, you can see it there, the big mound nest, which is filled with that leaf litter that she talked about with the kids. She told everyone not to stand on it, and then explained how it builds its nest. She said that they nest in Juljul, which is Mardu for thicket country, where there's lots of leaf litter and there's protection for the nests. She said that the male Nunamara builds up the sides of the nest with sand and then fills it up with that leaf litter. And then that's there to keep the eggs warm. And it actually uses a composting process when it gets rained on, which is moderated by the male malleefowl as it covers and uncovers the nest to keep it at exactly 33 degrees, which is incredible. You can see all sorts of physics connections in there as well. She explained that, she talked about that. She said that eventually the chicks scrape their way out of the nest, feet first, and then the father leaves the chicks to look after themselves, which met with lots of discussion by the kids on the day. They wanted to measure the size of the mound, but we'd forgot the tape measure. So we thought, how can we do that? And came up with a strategy to do that by all standing around it. Something we could repeat back in the classroom. And then Lauren had planned some activities for the students. She asked them to imagine that they were a malleefowl and that they needed to collect what they needed to make their mound nest. And so Rita then showed the kids what the plants were, and they collected some litter, obviously away from where the malleefowl mound nest was. And she identified there's garia, which is an acacia. There was a wama, which is a type of hakea, a burrard, which is miliary, which is a eucalypt, and then junpi, which is the spinifex that you can see growing there as well. And they wrote down those names, those language names to use back in class. And so the kids picked up all of this litter and found stuff as they were going and put it in buckets to take back to the class. And they, when they were back in class, they did a recount based on what they'd done, and they wrote an article for the Wooloona Wire. And you can see there Adriano Truscott, who was the principal at the time, using an inside-outside circle, a cooperative learning strategy which is used for EALD students for speaking skills. And they had to say and practice some of those words that they'd learnt, and wrote the article for the Wooloona Wire. They measured the nest. They recreated their circle and discovered that it was around 4 metres wide. And then they emptied all of that material onto a tarpaulin and went through it. And they were looking for evidence of the diet of the malleefowl, because that's where they're like big chooks, really. They just scrape up lots of material from the ground. And they collected that in some jars and learnt, and then revisited the names of those trees in Murruwonka while they were doing that. They sorted and classified all of the evidence of diet that they'd found into vegetable matter and then and animals, and then they looked at some of those things under the digital microscope and found, as you can see, some all sorts of different insects and remains of spiders and things like that. Then they used all of that material to recreate a malleefowl mound back in the classroom, and you can see there, again, under guidance of Rita, who's the elder. She was there all the way through, and this is what two-way science is all about, that combination of knowledge and valuing of Mardu, in this case, Mardu knowledge. They put some eggs inside there. You can see some boiled eggs down the bottom. They still haven't hatched, unfortunately. They made a mural to sort of represent that habitat. Another stage after this was to turn this into a food web, and then the community came and saw the nest, and they'd had a sign up there to make sure everyone knew that it was a malleefowl mound nest. But you can see there that this integrated inquiry approach is can cover so many different learning areas and produce so much rich cultural learning and alongside that Western science learning. And as you know, when kids are engaged, like they were all the way through this, they're just sponges. They were using Murruwonka that they'd learned. They could explain to you, word for word what Rita had told them, what they'd learnt on the video. They were using scientific language, and they were representing it in all sorts of ways in the curriculum. I'll hand over to Cam to tell you some more stories.
Thanks. G'day guys, my name's Cameron. I've worked on this project since the beginning in 2016. My background is biology and teaching, and I guess I combine those for this job really well. So I'm just going to go through a presentation today. It's almost like a case study of a two-way science project in a remote community that we work in. It's titled What Animals Live in Pear Creek. So this is Moimo, the teacher, and I guess what I want you to take from this case study is probably the profound effect that two-way science can have on the education of kids in these communities. So Warralong community, it's got fancy here with the animations, so it's 160 k's southeast of Port Hedland. Really tiny, it's a population of 100, quite transient, and the people are Nyungamata and Maru people. So it's alcohol-free community, it's a dry community, and to get a context, a lot of people have trouble sort of with the context of these communities. There's 20 houses, there's no shop, and there's a school. There's a K to 12, and a very community-orientated school. So the steps in planning a two-way science investigation. So we followed our science two-way science teaching and learning cycle. We start off with a tool called the Bush Planner, and that helps us get the Indigenous knowledge. From there, we discuss with Aboriginal experts and teachers what they want their kids to learn, and then we use the resources, plan and teach. So the Bush Planner, so this is a planning tool which we need because two-way science is responsive, it's culturally responsive, and it's also responsive to the environment. And the environment is always changing where we work, so we need to be able to figure out what's happening in the bush to pick a suitable topic. and the bush planner tells us that. So here's one that we've completed, and it says, what's happening in the bush in term 3. In the top left, it's like, what's the weather doing? What are the plants and the trees doing? What are the animals doing? And then what are the waterways doing? And as you can see, there's all this knowledge that community have filled out. And as a biologist, I'm still learning so much, and I'm always just absolutely mind blown by the amount of knowledge that community members have got about the bush. And it is an awesome sort of outdoor classroom they've got on their doorstep, and you've got experts. So we did this bush planner, and what we learned is, so it's a cold time of year, so if we look bottom left, and it's like reptiles, inactive because they're quite cruel. What else have we got? All the animals are concentrated around water holes because there's not much water around. But one of the elders said, he thought it'd be a good time to look at fish, and this is because all the rivers and the creeks at this time of year they're down, and that means all the fish and wildlife is concentrated in these water holes, so it's quite easy to catch, and the water's also clear. So from that, we came up with the investigation of what animals live in Pear Creek. So Pear Creek's a little creek that runs behind the community. And it's just a basic science inquiry sort of investigation. So we started with predictions, what are we going to catch in there? What do you think? How are we going to find out? And then we're going to follow it up in the classroom. And it's important to remember that the kids here, English is their second, sometimes third language. And a lot of the science terminology, they've never heard it before. You've got to actually go and pronounce it with the kids because a lot of the phonics is very different. So we started off just teaching the whole concept of predictions. You've got to explicitly teach it, and you've got to always teach it routinely. And the kids, once it was taught, they got an understanding of the concepts. So what do we have there? We had sharks, birds, etc. So we recorded our predictions. And then we went down to Pear Creek, and we we're going to use little dab nets to sample for aquatic life. And as you can see, we've got a community teacher, Josiah, he's leading the way. Here we got the kids going nuts with the nets. And it's remarkable just the amount of wildlife out there. So these, each pool is just full of fish. So we did that. So we got enough fish to put in jars. We took them back to the school and then put them in the freezer. And then how do we follow it up in the classroom? So it's, as Dave mentioned before, it's all great to go out on country, but we need sort of like genuine educational outcomes, thank you. And here with the kids, so the fundamentals of counting, they're still learning to count. So we sat down and we caught the cat, I got the catch, and then we sorted it into groups. As you can see here, we're sorting it to different species. And originally the kids grouped all the fish together, and we had a discussion, all the fish the same, and it was identified there was 2 different species there. And representing the data. So these kids are really, really good interpreting graphs because they're very visual learners. So we made a pictograph. There was a big discussion on that. It was easily interpreted. All the students could identify, what species of fish was most abundant, what we caught the most of, we caught the least of. And then sharing the story. So I go back to, so we don't want this learning to be restricted by students' literacy levels. So the best way to share this learning is actually drawing and then get kids talking about it. So as you can see here, we learned about the anatomy of a fish, and then kids have drawn spiders and fish, and then sharing the story. So we did, what did you draw? What did you catch? Did your prediction match the results? I've just included scope and sequence here. So as you can see, just by doing this, we cross and meet a lot of the curriculum off, especially biological sciences. And then these ones too. So we're basically doing an investigation that satisfies the curriculum. Some of the other projects that we've done, especially for the bigger kids, we've done fish sampling using specialised nets. We've also used something called BRUVs, which are baited remote underwater videos. So it's a fancy name for a GoPro that's on a frame in front of a bait box. So you just put it in the water and then recording videos. Kids designed all this themselves. And then we got to look like that. And it gives a perspective that they've never seen before. And then we went back to the classroom, we identified the species, we've got the language name, and we got Aboriginal teachers leading the way again, both outside and then in the classroom. Here we're using the digital microscopes. This was an investigation because we wondered what fish ate. Do all fish eat the same thing? And we might not see fish eat stuff, but the best way to have a look, we decided, was to open the tucker box and look under the microscope. And we found that the little spangled perch, the language name irrigana, were full of little aquatic insects, while other species like catfish were full of algae and stuff like that. Then we had a fishing competition because we identified the kids were finding measurement challenging. So we incorporated, all right, we'll have a fishing competition, we'll identify the species, but then we'll measure them. Here's tallying and counting and graphing, and back to measuring. So we always like to have Aboriginal teachers sort of leading the way. As I said before, I reckon that's the best way that these kids learn. Here we've got Josiah showing a student how to measure. And we're back to with informal measurement units. And once kids sort of got the concept of measuring, they'd want to measure everything. Here's a king brown snake that the kids wanted to come in and measure. And once they get a hold of a concept, they want to measure absolutely everything. Here was lunch. And then another investigation we did is animals around the community. So all the people knew about different sort of animals, but we don't often see them, but we see the signs. So we see like the tracks and the scats. But one way that we can see them is actually putting out motion sensor cameras, and that's best practice biology used in sampling. So all these kids are experts on motion sensor cameras, so we set them around the community. And we had an investigation of one was who visits this waterhole. Black Beauty. And they got little bilby, so they're an endangered animal. Kids absolutely love this. And then we got the bad pussycat, so that's why a lot of our animals are endangered. You can see the shadow of the camera just in front of him.
How long was it left there for?
Between a week and 6 weeks. And then here's sort of how we recorded that data. And that was a project. So the kids learnt about that, and then they filled out the data sheet, and then they did a report on it. And this sort of complements because there's a big bilby conservation program going on around that community with scientists, and they're using the exact same sampling techniques with the cameras. That's all I've got. I've gone a bit too far.
Awesome. And so you can see there, there's lots of connections between this work that the kids are doing and Aboriginal ranger programs, land management, and those careers that exist in the community, mining rehabilitation. There's a sort of a strong focus in two-way science on ecology and biology, because there's lots of strong logical connections to Indigenous knowledge, and that's really the important sort of message, because these kids are experiencing success and achieving at a high level for their age, because they're using their sort of language and their culture to which is expressed through this kind of work, and it's I think that's one of the fundamental things that the kids' identity is valued in that process. They're feeling good about themselves and about what they're learning. This gives us an idea, I guess, about the scope of the project in the schools. It's as much a kind of community development project, really, in lots of ways, as it is an education project, and brings everyone together, and uses those opportunities that are out in remote schools. Really, it reframes remote education as a sort of a field of opportunity, rather than other narratives that you hear in the media and in sort of discourse. Lots of different stakeholders and people. You can see down there, there's a local two-way science coordinator, someone in the school whose job it is, you have literacy specialists, numeracy specialists, and you can also have people doing this kind of work to bring those connections and to help plan and connect to the curriculum. I'll play a video in a minute, which is from Areyonga in the Northern Territory, but it's one of these videos that we've developed with ACARA. You can go and find these on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Histories and Cultures section of the ACARA website, and we worked together with them on to make 4 videos, which again show what we're on about. And as I've just mentioned, there's these education resources that we've just published, which are one part of what we do, and gives, I guess, some pictures of the places and people and activities that we've worked with, and some ideas around how this can work. What's in there is sort of themed sections, animals, plants, water, seasons, places, maps and country, common themes that come up in this type of education, and there's some background knowledge, but there's also there's some background knowledge about general Indigenous knowledge, but there's not a lot of that, because Aboriginal knowledge is for the local people in the community to teach, and so this creates a space for that to happen. Okay, I'll play a video, and if we've got time, that's good. We can have a few questions afterwards.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are warned that the following video may contain images and voices of deceased persons. ACARA would like to acknowledge that this video was filmed on Pitjantjatjara country, and the Pitjantjatjara and Luritja knowledge holders' contribution to this project. This illustration demonstrates how the 3 dimensions of the Australian curriculum work authentically together through a focus on the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures cross-curriculum priority.
Areyonga is a community based 215 kilometres southwest of Alice Springs. It has approximately 250 people living in the community. Our school has 35 students, and 100% of those are Indigenous. Learning on country here at Areyonga School involves the entire community, and it's where the students get to experience learning outside of the 4 walls of the classroom. It's just a hands-on experience of their own culture.
Two-way science aims to explore and validate Indigenous scientific knowledge, which shows that 2 different knowledge systems can be used together to reach the same conclusion.
If I want to do culture, it's up to me. I have to talk to the teacher. This is what I want to teach the kids. I want to teach about trees. I want to teach the kids about water. Then we sit down and do the planning.
Today's two-way science investigation is to find out if these particular springs here, called Manta Manta, are healthy at the moment.
So prior to coming out to the springs, we did a lot of work on living things, their life cycles, their habitats, how they affect their environment and how the environment affects them. On top of that, we've also done a lot of sort of science inquiry skills, so predicting and questioning.
So the question we're trying to answer today is Manta Manta a healthy water place? And is it more or less healthy than it was last year? Daphne Burton is an elder in the community who's lived here for a very long time, so she's seen the use and management of the springs over time. She was talking to the students about the dams that have been built over the years and how they were used by the community, both for the community water source and for fun things like swimming races. Daphne also was able to tell the students about the dreaming story associated with this place. As we walked into the springs, Indigenous teacher Tana Andrews taught the students about the different plants and the different animals that are coming into the springs.
Bingo. Bingo. Papa ina pulkanya. Kanyangaya. Kanyangaya. Papa.
Baby dingo. Baby dingo.
Bingo kolop. Papa ina kolop.
They want to drink water.
So the way we were testing the health of the water was to search for the small animals living in the water. So we're going to scoop around.
There's a fish.
We don't want to pick up lots of gunk. We just want to scoop down low in the water like this, okay? If we sit really still and watch, we're going to see some little creatures moving. To use the pipette, you squeeze it, squeeze the top, and then put it in the water. And when you let it go, it's going to suck it up like that, okay?
When the students are out bush, they seem much more engaged. They ask a lot more questions, which is a key skill in science learning.
They understand the concepts a lot better and they can certainly take a lot more ownership of the learning that's happening.
Hey, I got the biggest fish! Whoa, bring him up here to the water. I got the biggest fish!
Don't look like another fish, but we have to send it to the doctor to make it sure it's belong to the Pink River.
So once we'd collected all the animals, the children brought them all together and we had a look at them under the Dynoscope, which is a small microscope that you can plug into your computer. We use that microscope to have a look at animals that are very small and potentially identify animals that we haven't been able to, and also to keep a record of what we've caught. All right, so now we're going to fill out the waterhole creatures in Central Australia identification sheet. This is where we circle all the things that we've found today. Did you find yabbies? We found lots of yabbies, didn't we? Did anyone see a tadpole? So it's really important having the elders on the trip. They bring a sense of community. They bring a certain depth of language.
What is kurchi kurchi?
Tadpole.
Tadpole. Kurchi kurchi and
Frog.
wang kangana banganya banyana wanganya. Ngangi. Tadpole and a frog. It's called kurchi kurchi and ngangi.
On the other side of that identification sheet, we've got a pollution indicator chart. Now these ones down the bottom are the animals that can live in all sorts of water. The amount of animals in the different categories of sensitivity on that chart will give you an idea of the level of pollution of the water. So if you've got lots of animals that are quite sensitive to pollution, then you can make an estimation that the water's fairly healthy. So look, we haven't got much in this top row this time. I think last time we've had a lot more things that we've found.
We came here the first year. And ngana yang chul tamala banya. Why? Nango. Kapi bulkanga. After the rain.
So once the students had collected their data, we went back to the classroom and compared the data we found today with data that we found in previous years.
And then we talked about comparing that data over the 3 years and how that could give us an idea of things changing at the springs and also things that stay the same.
So what I think is really valuable about the program and what I love about getting the kids out of the classroom and teaching out in the bush is that the science that we're learning that is very sort of Western science and what I learned in school is being tied together with the Anangu way of looking at science and explaining the world around them.
So one of the goals of the two-way science program is to empower Indigenous students to aim towards employment in scientific fields in future. For remote community students, that can often be as a ranger in the community, looking after the environment and caring for country that way.
If you don't teach any culture, that means children have no identity. It's better to teach the kids their culture, our culture. Kids can, learn both ways.
Thank you very much. I think we need to vacate the desk, is that right? Thank you very much. Yeah.